Welcome to It's Always Snowy in the West. It's Always Sunny in Hollywood. Today we're going to be talking about a Western classic by director Sergio Corbucci called The Great Silence. Probably best known for being one of the most prominent Westerns to take place during winter. I'm your host, Red Drumarts.
I'm Lugia.
And I am Patrick.
Yeah, so anyway, I guess before we jump into the movie, rest in peace Richard Lewis. I don't know how many of you guys are fans of Curb Your Enthusiasm, but Richard Lewis was a pretty he played himself on the show, and he was a pretty like decently big role. He was like a recurring character. So yeah, that's why I like know him best from. He was also in Robin Hood Men in Tights and like some other stuff. All right, let's see. The Great Silence. This is a 1968 spaghetti western directed by Sergio Corbucci. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Sergio Corbucci, but he was good friends with the more famous director Sergio Leone, and he was pretty prolific. If anything, he's Sergio Leone. I think he's got this sort of mythic status because well, one, he was like I would say like a better director in some regards, but I think the main reason is that Sergio Leone directed only a handful of films, where Sergio Corbucci directed a ton. And Sergio Corbucci's best movies, I say, does rival Leone's, but he has a lot of movies that don't rival Leone's. I'd say The Great Silence is his best movie, which is why I decided to recommend it. Yeah, so in 1967, Corbucci had gotten kind of tired of making westerns. They kind of varied a lot in quality and commercial viability, and having returned to Rome after completing the principal photography on the spy film Death on the Run, he decided to that another western set during a blizzard, which was meant to be a sort of a homage to other snow westerns, Day of the Outlaw and John Ford's Cheyenne Autumn, would be a nice change of pace. So basically, this movie was a man that was the circumstances of this movie's creation was a man who was basically tired of making westerns, really pulling out all the stops to sort of make it fresh, new, and I think like it went beyond just like, oh, I'm gonna change the setting so it's new. He really like wanted to, there was a certain drive that I think kind of came through. Again, I know you guys haven't seen his other westerns, so you can't like you wouldn't know the difference, but what's funny is his most famous movie is Django, which obviously was inspiration for Django Unchained. It was an adaptation of Yojimbo, like a fistful of dollars, but it took like much more interesting changes. That film, he also considered having it take place during a snowy setting. Instead, that took place just during like regular muddy conditions, but due to budget. But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how his two most famous movies are both kind of he both kind of had the idea of having them take place during like very adverse weather conditions.
This would make it different from the standard desert that we're familiar with when it comes to westerns.
Yeah, and according to the actor and producer Lars Block, having it take place during a snowy setting also gave Corbucci an opportunity to film it near resorts, which allowed him to go skiing on holiday. So yeah, part of the reason this movie is the way it is because he wanted to ski when he had big off days or when he
We
was
quite
doing something
literally made a
good.
movie on his vacation.
Yeah, so casting English-speaking actors in spaghetti westerns was a growing practice at the time. Obviously, Leone did it with Clint Eastwood because it was believed to allow that was done so because for international marketability. The I guess the spark for this the actual story for this happened when Marcello Mastroianni wanted to appear in a western with Corbucci, but was told that his inability to speak English would kind of hold back the film. So basically, he conceived of the idea of a mute gunfighter, and then Corbucci was like, "All right, I can work with that." So I don't even know if like he's in the movie. So like it's kind of interesting. Like both the actors I mentioned, like I don't think they're in the film. So Corbucci went to John Louis Trictianti to play the lead. This was actually his second choice. His first choice was, of course, the actor who played Django, Franco Nero. I guess a convenient thing is that this actor also did not speak English. That's why the character's mute, basically, because they got an actor who couldn't speak English, and he got the idea last time he got an actor who couldn't speak English. a lot of the film when it was shot on a resort was filmed at night, so the fake snow looked more convincing. They used like 20 tons of shaving cream to give the street a more snowbound look.
Oh fuck, really?
Yeah, the Elios Filmtown set, which was also used in Django. This movie has a lot of parallels to Django that I did not realize until I looked up the behind the scenes. He also used camera overexposure to occasionally avoid continuity errors, and lots of fog also, to disguise the fact that a lot of the countryside had no snow. So yeah, there was a lot of like directing techniques used here when they couldn't have actual snow. Also, one more thing is obviously, I don't know if you guys noticed, but Sergio Leone's score guy, Ennio Morricone, he also scored this film. Anyway, basically, the plot of the story is Henry Pollicut and two other bounty hunters murder a man named Gordon and his wife, and to prevent Gordon's son from giving it away, the killers slice the boy's throat, which renders him permanently mute. And then eventually, Pollicut becomes a corrupt Utah banker. So years later, Gordon's son, now going by the moniker Silence, basically becomes a sort of like bounty hunter, but he operates on this principle where he always tries to provoke his enemies into drawing the weapons first so he can kill them in self-defense. And yeah, so severe blizzard has swept the frontier, and as a result, much of the community is forced to steal in order to survive. And Polycut, who wants to make a profit by attaining property after they're killed, places prices on thieves' heads, which attracts a bounty hunter gang. So Silence works with the bandits and their allies to fight against the killers, and there's a lot of sort of like twists and turns with sort of the gang stuff. I know one of the outlaws leaves the safety of the group to be with his wife, and then James is killed by that said person is killed by Loco, who then takes the wife hostage. And yeah, Pauline writes to Silence requesting him to kill Loco, and then there's a lot of like trying to organize the governor is trying to maintain order and whatnot. Now there's a few sequences where people get kind of lost in snow in the stagecoaches, and yeah, and Silence eventually meets Pauline, who then raises the reward. Pauline attempts to sell her house to Pollicut, who demands she becomes his mistress, which is the actual reason he put the bounty on her husband. Obviously, Silence refuses. Silence leaves for the town saloon and then tries to prevent Loco into drawing. But instead, Loco beats him until Silence starts fighting back. Loco tries to shoot him, but stopped, arrested for his murder. Yeah, he's taken to prison. But before leaving, Bernard requests that townspeople provide food to the outlaws, and obviously, Pauline starts a romantic relationship with Silence. So yeah, Bernard and Loco stop by a frozen lake. He then springs traps, shooting the ice surrounding Bernard, leaving him to die. And then Loco rides to the hideout and convinces the rest of the gang to sort of confront Silence, determined to take Pauline by force. Polycut and his henchmen basically attempt to rape and torture Pauline and Silence, respectively, although Silence, overpowers them and kills Polycut. Then Loco and his gang kind of have this sort of a final showdown here, try to lure out both of them, and they challenge them to a duel. So Pauline obviously knows the duel is a trap, but Silence still goes there, and yeah, he dies, and then Pauline also dies. This is the bleakest ending, like, of any Western I've honestly seen.
It threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting the ending to be the way it was.
Yeah, this is
Yeah, I
why
was
I told you.
not
This is why I told
expecting
you guys to go
such.
blind, because I went in blind, and I was like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And then like the ending title card is like Local's actions resulted in widespread public condemnation of bounty killing, and the memorial was erected in Snow Hill to honor those who died through his greed. And I was like, Jesus Christ! Like the villain just
Yeah,
wins.
if you're looking for a feel-good movie, keep looking. This ain't it.
So what's interesting is that there's actually several alternative endings to this film. So due to the bleak nature of the original finale, Corbucci shot an alternate ending to appease the producers because it was going to be released on Christmas. And they were like, "Yeah, we want something more seasonal to release on Christmas." And they kind of suggested that the happy ending was like meant to be shot for North African and Asian markets. Although there's no like evidence to suggest this ending was seen in either region, but that's what like production history is told. Some of the footage for this alternate ending appeared in the film's trailer, but it is believed that there's no audio elements for this. So like you can actually find like the alternate ending, on like some DVDs and stuff, but it seems whatever audio had got like lost. So all the alternate endings people find are like are mute. I think like they eventually found one with like the Italian track. But yeah, anyway, what happens in this alternate ending is that Loco draws his gun without waiting to be prompted by silence. Suddenly, Burnett, having survived falling into the frozen lake, rides in town and shoots Loco in the head, allowing Silence to kill the remaining bounty hunters. So Burnett frees the outlaws while Pauline takes the bandages off Silence's burnt right hand, revealing a gauntlet he used for protection before applying bandages to his wounded left hand. As Burnett takes thieves to the local jail awaiting their amnesty, he asks Silence to become a deputy, which he accepts with a smile. So that's the alternate happy ending, if you want an alternate happy ending. But this was not the intended ending of Corbucci. Corbucci also made a second ending. This one, I think, he wrote an ambiguous ending. I guess trying to convince the producers to like not go with the happy ending, maybe to go with this one. So this version is a recap of the intended ending with additional footage, and this was in the same special features thing that that included the alternate ending with the Italian audio. Also included also includes this alternate ending. So I guess the film movement Blu-ray is the ideal sort of Blu-ray to get for this film if you ever want to purchase it. But yeah, so that ending depicts Silence being shot in both his hands before he can draw his gun. He collapses on the ground as Pauline watches in shock, and appearing to show a changing heart, Loco gestures to his men to leave the saloon. As a result, the fate of Silent, Pauline, and the outlaws are left unknown. But what's funny is that despite thinking that the original film endings was too bleak, when they got the alternate endings, all the producers agreed that you know what, the original ending is better. Which is why I said those endings are not what you guys saw. I guess they critics have said that they believe that the alternate endings were emotionally dissatisfying conclusion for Corbucci's otherwise harrowing anti-fable, and he thought the ambiguous ending fails in his lack of answers. They just felt like the whole tone of the film was very bleak and kind of gave it the feeling of a tragedy, so it just makes more sense for it to have the tragic ending because that's clearly what it was. They felt that it was a much more, it built up to that ending much more than did the happy ending or the ambiguous ending. I did enough talking. What did you guys think of the film broadly?
All right, so I have a quick question before we get into the main discussion. Did you
Sure.
guys see this movie subbed or dubbed?
Dubbed.
Subbed.
Okay, because I watched this dubbed, like Patrick, and admittedly, I was kind of taken out of it for a little bit because the English dubbing for this movie is so weird.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
I mean, I got used to it after a certain point, but the beginning,
Yeah, that's why I watched it subbed.
the first 30 minutes, and especially the scene where one of the guys is just like eating chicken, like that took me out of it. I mean, that's my fault. I probably should have watched it subbed anyway, but like,
It was weird, but yeah, I got used to it. Eventually, it just became a minor distraction, but it didn't ruin anything. But aside from that, I enjoyed this one. I thought the winter setting was a nice change of pace. It gave it a unique identity compared to most westerns. Good characters, great score, gorgeous cinematography. I liked it.
from what I understand, this was a couple years after The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now, I'm not saying The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is basically like a standard for westerns. I'm just going off of what we've seen for the podcast. This is kind of like that movie, but if some of the roles were reversed and the outcomes were changed. So like
Yeah.
silence
So you
silence
guys
is the
haven't
good, right?
you guys
Uh
haven't seen you guys haven't seen Once Upon a Time in the West, right?
no.
No.
Okay. So The Good, the Bad, the Ugly was basically Sergio Leone was like he made it's the ultimate western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So after that, Sergio Leone made Once Upon a Time in the West, which is meant to very much be a subversion, and I think The Great Silence is much more comparable to Once Upon a Time in the West, being this sort of subversive thing. It even has like the revenge story kind of aspect to it. But I do want to hear what you guys say because to me, this movie thought it felt more of like it was trying to be a flip on on Once Upon a Time in the West, or maybe Once Upon a Time. Let me actually find out when Once Upon a Time in the West came out. Yeah, Once Upon a Time in the West came out the same year as this actually.
This was
Huh.
68.
Yeah, so Once Upon a Time in the
Mhm.
West also came out in '68. So I kind of felt, both of them kind of they're either like very similar films with the revenge thing. Once Upon a Time in the West also obviously has like a happier ending, but I also find it like kind of interesting how kind of like subversive it is and kind of how it does push a lot of things in the good and bad, the ugly to like breaking point. But yeah, I feel like all three of these films are kind of like an interesting conversation with each other. But yeah, go on.
Right. So if we were to like compare the characters, basically, Silence is the good, Loco is the bad, and I guess you could argue Burnett is the ugly, but it kind of plays around with your expectations because, well, I'm mainly just talking about the conclusion, like where it doesn't really go in Silence's favor. Because again, like I think that was the most standout part of the movie because you would think by some miracle, Silence would just walk up and shoot Loco, like no big deal, but he has backup and Loco doesn't play nice. Whereas with the good, bad, the ugly, it was just those three in that cemetery.
Yeah, I get you. So yeah, basically, I guess my thoughts on this movie is I love it. I think this is one of like the best westerns ever made, alongside the two previous ones I mentioned. Naturally, I watched it subbed, so I didn't have as much of an issue with the acting that you guys probably did. I do think I like the good, the bad, the ugly, and Once Upon a Time in the West more. I guess just as much as I respect the boldness of the. Actually, I like the movie for the boldness of the subversions and whatnot, but I still just kind of like the other two a bit more, even though they're a bit more traditional. Because like, here's the funny thing: Sergio Leone movies are like, because they're the westerns that everyone watches, they're what everyone's idea of a western is now. What's really funny is that Sergio Leone was like really subversive at his time because everyone's idea of a western at the time was a John Ford film. So Sergio Leone was actually like really unique. And then it's kind of funny, like seeing Corbucci, kind of feel like he in many ways is somewhat responding to Leone because like I mentioned, Django was basically a remake of A Fistful of Dollars, but with like a bit more grit to it. And I feel like now that you kind of mentioned it, yeah, this does kind of feel like a sort of like dark sort of take on the good, the bad, the ugly. And again, I think premise wise is very similar to Once Upon a Time in the West. Like if you watch like this and Once Upon a Time in the West back to back, you'll kind of be like, yeah, it definitely kind of feels like sort of like a dark mirror version to Leone,
I mean, I
which
have to watch
I did
that
not.
now because I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
curious, like how much this subverts from the good, the bad, and the ugly. Once upon
yeah.
a time in the West, I mean.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Once Upon a Time in the West, the premise is basically um this mysterious man who called Harmonica, and he's not like mute, but he's mostly pretty quiet, and he always plays this kind of harmonica. He basically he's got like a similar premise with this like bandit who killed his family, and the kid wanting revenge, and then the him sort of taking over the town, and like this kind of woman that's kind of at the center of it. It's like they're pretty similar. It's just it's less brutal. I feel like a lot of people probably like went into Great Science expecting like the same kind of like epic ending of Once Upon a Time in the West, which in my opinion, like you don't have the good and the bad, the ugly. That had the amazing fucking ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time in the West, it's like on par. It's like holy fucking shit. And so in Great Silence, like because the movies are so similar, I went into Great Silence kind of expecting that kind of like, like the fucking Morricone music to start like rising, and then they had like this kind of like epic final duel. But no, dude just gets fucking obliterated, and I'm like, I should have expected this, and I did. Like the whole time I was like, this probably isn't gonna end well, but like it's still like, fuck. Like
I was half
it
expecting
fits
the
per-
result
it
that
fits
happened, but I
perfect.
was also thinking like, oh, it's probably just gonna be like another Hollywood ending, like where Silence
Like
makes it
the
out okay and he gets Pauline and like they have a good
Nope.
life. Yes.
Yeah, the tragic ending fits perfectly, but like because of like the Leone westerns, I just expected it to have the same ending as the Leone western. So like it was like a real interesting shot. But like it's one of those shots where like in retrospect you're like, no, that fits. This movie was bleak as hell. Why would it have a
This
happy
man
ending?
literally walked up to Loco knowing damn well that he already had other people ready to shoot him on sight. And he got what he deserved, really, because
Like
that was a
I mean,
dumb
they
move
straight
on
up
his
said like
part.
Pauline straight up said like it's a trap, don't go. But he was like, no, I must. And like Yeah, but I guess it's really smart because you always expect like the Western hero to like somehow beat it against all odds. So I just kind of thought that like he'd just be like so badass that he did it. And this is not to say like the Sergio Leone movies aren't actually like incredibly complex. 'Cause I think Once Upon a Time in the West is actually like very very layered in themes and whatnot. Which again, and I think it's still pretty subversive. But like you can definitely tell like he's a lot more. It feels weird saying that Sergio Leone is more Hollywood just because like he's considered the more artsy one when like Corbucci is considered like the more like he's much more of like the
Standard?
well yeah, I mean it's kind of like comparing like Stanley Kubrick to like Wes Craven. Like Wes Craven's like a very respectable horror director, but he pumps out a lot of stuff. And like some of his stuff's got kind of like a B movie schlock level to it when like every single thing that like Leone did is like incredibly prestigious and he's kind of considered like the greatest the best of the best. So it's kind of interesting that like despite this kind of prestige status, like Corbucci, I guess because Corbucci made so many movies and because they were, you know, a lot more kind of B movie kind of sleaze to it, he was kind of able to like did like sort of push more interesting taboo stuff. But again, Leone was very subversive. It's just he was subversive to like John Ford when I think Corbucci was much more subversive to the actual spaghetti western environment that Leone pioneered. So it's kind of like interesting they respond to like they very much were responding to like different kind of environments because Leone was like he looked at samurai films and he was like, okay, I'm gonna try to combine samurai films with the western, but also try to subvert the western. You know, I talk about like the epic western hero, but like the thing with Sergio Leone is that his like compared to like John Ford or John Ford, it is like these sort of romantic archetypal thing. When Sergio Leone has like a lot more grit to him, and Corbucci basically he just kind of dials grit up to like 11. So Leone obviously has like a lot more kind of like dedicated action sequences, but I feel like this film had a couple sequences too. What did you guys think of the I guess action or like the tension and whatnot?
It's always funny to me how like every time there's a scene where like shit's about to go down, they always have this zoom in on characters' faces like before like someone takes out a gun and shoots them. And it happens like almost every time.
Hey, no one does a zoom better than a western.
True.
And again, that's probably because of Leone, because he's kind of the dude that really like to emphasize his. I mean, John Ford too. I feel like I'm gonna have to recommend a John Ford movie eventually now, just because like it's Leone and John Ford. Those are like the two big Western directors, and like everyone else is just kind of riffing off of them. In fact, I feel like when I show you a John Ford movie, you're gonna be like, "Oh, Steven Spielberg has ripped this man off his entire career," and yes, he did. Like he even admits it. I don't know if I haven't seen the Fablemans yet, but from what I understand, a big part of the Fablemans is Steven Spielberg saying John Ford is the greatest director ever. I've spent my entire career trying to be John Ford. And like John Ford even like shows up in the movie. Like obviously like David Lynch plays John Ford. So like yeah. One thing I thought was like really cool about the movies was like the kind of western shootouts because there was a lot more than usual, but I also liked like the kind of like game of chicken they play because I feel like in all those like classic like western shootouts it's always like, it hits noon and then like, it's a timer to get off. I thought it was kind of interesting here how like the western shootout was like a game of chicken. They actually like take into account the self-defense clause. I thought that was like such a cool idea. You can't actually be like the fastest draw. You have to be like the fastest, but also like second. It was like a really cool kind of like dynamic that I feel like was much more compelling than most other westerns. But yeah, one thing I also really liked was the winter shootout thing where like the guy was hiding the gun and like there was like some great tension with us like expecting like oh it's gonna happen and then there was a great subversion like when he shot it but like the gun got kind of frozen. Like I thought that was like a cool kind of like playing with expectations thing where
And
like
then when he sees the outlaws again, like he learns from his mistakes and actually has covering over his gun.
yeah, like that's what I thought was like so clever. It was like, oh, okay, like yeah, like again, like this is like some of the most fun gun stuff I've seen in a western, which is like probably a weird thing to hone in on, but like considering like basically like the action of the film, like I think it's interesting. Yeah. Honestly, like it's kind of interesting like looking back at like the western because they're kind of and Hitchcock because they're both of them are basically considered like the prototype to action movies, but they have like all of their action is entirely like suspense focused rather than like the much more visceral type of action we're known for now, which I think is kind of interesting. All that stuff is like basically trying to like stretch out the tension and then having a burst versus movies now. Tension is like not really like the focus.
Can we talk for a second about Loco?
Yes.
This dude This dude is such a delightfully despicable individual.
Loco was interesting to me because
I love to hate him.
yeah, Loco was interesting to me because Loco is the only actor in this movie that I actually was familiar with prior to watching the film. So and he plays a very different fucking character than he usually does. I was like, holy shit, dude! Oh my god!
Was it
Because
usually like a hero
That
archetype?
so this guy Klaus Kinensky, he's best known for being you know how every director kind of has like their signature actor.
Mhm.
He is the signature actor of Werner Herzog. He's been the main character, or at least a significant character, in about 5 of his films. I guess he does somewhat play like villainous character. I haven't seen like all the movies he was in, but like I believe his most like famous role was Aguirre, the Wrath of God, and I believe in that one he plays like a conquistador. But despite that, he's like still like heroic. So like yeah, he usually plays I guess more like heroic characters. He was in like his
Really?
Nosferatu. It depends. I mean, in Nosferatu, he
'Cause
played
I
Count
I thought he
Dracula.
nailed this. I thought he nailed being the villain here.
Yeah, he like I feel like it's I guess it's kind of a mix because Aguirre Wrath of God, he played a conquistador, but he was still the hero. But like obviously, it's a bit more mixed. In Nosferatu the Vampire, he played Nosferatu, a different Nosferatu than the one in SpongeBob, by the way. Because there's the original like silent German Nosferatu film. Well, I mean, this one's also German, but like the Werner Herzog one's a remake. Um,
This one has never flicked a light switch in his life because he's not a rapscallion. He's a good boy.
Well, that's something kind of funny is Werner Herzog apparently clashed with Kinski all the time, and so it's like, why the fuck did you hire him 5 times? And like, you always made him the main character too, and I was like, oh. This character very much fits, I guess, the line of like his usual characters, but it's just kind of interesting that he's playing like the villain when like usually he plays the main character.
So it's sort of like a Denzel Washington Training Day situation where he usually plays like typically a good guy, but in Training Day he's literally the main villain.
Yeah, the villain was like a really great performance. I felt honestly Silence had like a pretty good performance, like given the fact that you know he doesn't say a word, but like yeah, I feel like you fully understand all of his emotions pretty well.
Honestly, yeah.
I
I,
agree.
I think his facial expressions and the way he uses his eyes just
Yeah,
already
Pauline.
conveys like what he's feeling at that current moment.
Yeah, Pauline was a very strong kind of a presence too. Let's see the score. I feel like obviously the score is great. I mean, it's done by Ennio Morricone, who's obviously like arguably one of the greatest composers of all time. What did you guys think?
Oh, yeah, score was fantastic.
I liked it. I just wish I could remember it.
Fair enough. It doesn't have like the same kind of mythic quality that like his work on Leone movies do, because this is trying to be a very different film. We didn't really talk about cinematography, but I kind of feel like given how like kind of silent and how this film's mostly kind of like you know told through images, it's probably worth discussing. Um, but yeah, I thought it was really well shot. A lot of like shots of just them in kind of like the winter or inside the more like deserty setting. Well, not the deserty setting, but like inside the town, prison and whatnot. But it was just really well shot. There's like I'm trying to like figure out the right words to it, but there feels like almost like kind of like a very like kind of woody texture to everything.
Like old
On the
fashioned.
Yeah, it's got like that kind of like sepia kind of tone to it, where like it feels there's like a somewhat of a gritty quality to it when they're like not in the snowy settings. In the snowy settings, it feels like kind of brutal and there's like a lot of fog and stuff. But like I feel like during like the when we are in like the more
Because
less snowy parts of town and whatnot.
outside of civilization, anything could happen. Like that's where the bandits were.
But I feel like when you're actually like in the town and stuff, there's like a very like interesting kind of quality to like the brown tones and whatnot. That like just really stood out to me because it felt like it made the film feel like have this kind of like aged quality to it, and I feel like it almost does give it a kind of foreboding like tone to it because like like I don't know how to like quite describe it, but I liked the kind of color quality to the browns. Obviously the white snow and whatnot was very like bold and striking. But I just want to say like even when they're outside like the snowy things, I felt like the cinematography was like really good. I really like the color quality.
Anything
I don't
else?
know, guys. Any more thoughts? Yeah.
I don't think I really have much to add.
I think I've said my part.
All right. So yeah, Great Silence, highly recommend it. If you like this film, check out Hateful Eight, and the previous two Sergio Leone films we mentioned, and also Django. I'd say, you know what, both Unchained and the original, directed by Corbucci. I believe, whose recommendation is it now? I
It
believe
It's
would
it's
be
mine.
Lucy's
mine.
turn.
Oh no, it's yours. Yeah, my mistake. I forgot that you did Rear Window. All right.
All right. I do not have a clever segue for this at all. But who wants to talk about teenage pregnancy?
Juno.
Yep.
Oh boy.
I've only ever seen this movie once, I think a few years ago. I was at a lake house with my family, and it's a
Oh, it's
lake
really
house that a
funny.
lot of people share. So they have a bunch of DVDs right next to a TV, and I saw Juno was one of them. I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot, and it was not what I was expecting.
I really like the director. I believe his name is Jason Reitman, son of Ivan Reitman. Like I really like his movie Up in the Air, and I do like Juno a lot. And like Juno was really big at the time, so it's gonna be interesting to revisit. What's really funny though is that the last like few days, yesterday I started rewatching Arrested Development, which stars Michael Cera and Jason Bateman, and obviously both of those actors are in Juno. What's really funny is that Michael Cera and Jason Bateman, they play father and son in Arrested Development, and they do not play father and son here at all.
I don't even think they have a scene together, if I remember.
No.
They don't. But, like, it's really funny that like they're both kind of like the main like two people in like Juno's lives. It was okay. So we've all three of us have seen this movie already, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to revisit though.
This
Have
is a
you guys
movie I've
seen
been
any of
meaning to rewatch for years.
yeah? Have you guys seen any of Jason Reitman's other films?
Uh,
Let me take a look real quick.
He directed Thank You for Smoking and Up in the Air, which are movies I
I've
like.
s- I've seen only other movie I've seen from him is Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I don't understand the Ghostbusters shit at all. Like, here's the thing. I know his dad directed the original Ghostbusters, but like, this guy was like an artsy filmmaker for like his entire career, and then suddenly he's just like, yeah, I'm gonna make sequels to my dad's movie. Even though like Dan Aykroyd was like honestly the main driving force behind like Ghostbusters and like Harold Ramis, so it wasn't even like Reitman didn't even do that much, but like whatever. It's
Okay,
kind of weird to me.
I have not seen any other one of his
Like
movies.
like his Ghostbusters movies are like, how do I put this? They're like proto like they're like pseudo Spielberg films. It's so weird because like Juno, Up in the Air, Thank You for Smoking, Tully, they all got like a very specific vibe to them. Young adult, and the Ghostbusters flicks just don't at all. So I'm like, I'm just wondering like what the hell happened? Like Tully only came out like a few years before Ghostbusters Afterlife. Like about as normal of a gap as like his other films. So I'm like, what the fuck happened, man? He also apparently produced Jennifer's Body and Whiplash. I was like, again, this guy was like an artsy fella, and like I think Up in the Air and Juno is definitely his most famous movie. But Thank You for Smoking, Up in the Air, I highly recommend. Um, especially Up in the Air, which I'm surprised I have not recommended yet because it's been on my list for a while. So, have we talked about any of the Reitmans before? We have not. All right, cool. Well, that's it for the show.